What's up, YouTube? Today we are going to talk about the great betrayal of modern education. Why we are indoctrinated into the belief that the subjects that we're taught and the way in which we're taught to behave and to memorize rather than to be a free thinker is what society wants from us. And as we can see now from the global education system, especially the Western education system here in the US, it is failing horrendously. I'm going to cover a video by Beyond the Obvious called The Great Betrayal of Modern Education. Without further ado, I'm going to get right into this. But before I do, be sure to hit the like and the subscribe button, ring that little bell, and select all so that you receive all the new content updates. Without further ado, let's get it going.
They told us education was the key to freedom. Then why do so many of us feel trapped?
They told you school was about learning, that it was a place where your mind would grow, where ideas would ignite, and where you'd discover who you are. But let's be honest, how much of what you learned in school do you truly remember today? Not the facts, not the dates, but the meaning? The truth is, school was never about learning. It was about remembering what someone else told you was important, remembering long enough to pass the test, then forgetting it forever. We confuse performance with understanding. We confuse memorization with wisdom.
That is a huge and valid point right there, and I have a major problem with that system as a whole based on that. Just because you're able to recall something to memory does not mean that you have wisdom or insight. Those two things are totally different, and they are not mutually together. They're not mutually exclusive. You have to understand the difference in wisdom and critical thinking versus simply having something memorization.
And in the process, we lost the one thing that made learning worth it: curiosity. As children, we ask why 100 times a day. By the time we graduate, we're afraid to raise our hand. What happened? We were taught that the right answer is more valuable than the right question, that mistakes are failure, not feedback, that your intelligence is a number, not a process. And when a child starts believing that being wrong is a threat, not an opportunity, that child stops exploring. They stop asking. They stop thinking. This is the great illusion, that just because we were in a classroom, we were growing. But many of us were shrinking, quietly.
That's very true. They no longer reward curiosity in the school system, and heck, in most households, I know the parents don't reward curiosity either. They punish it, and they reward conformity. If your child is conforming, they're not asking too many questions, they're not being too big of an aggravation, then you consider them to be a good kid. Oh, they're such a good kid, they're so well behaved, right? And that's why you have kids being pumped full of ADHD medications, walking around like little zombies. But they're well behaved, though. They're well behaved. And after all, isn't that what's most important? Let's not be inconvenient to us as the parents. Let's not be inconvenienced as us as the school teachers. Right? Let's just put them in a corner, make sure they're heavily medicated so that they don't ask questions, they don't try to get up and move around too much, and let's shrink their curiosity and improve their memorization.
Invisibly, fitting ourselves into molds that never fit. We learned how to sit still, how to follow rules, how to give the answer they wanted, even when we knew it wasn't the full truth. We weren't learning to think. We were learning to comply. Because the system doesn't reward the ones who see differently. It rewards the ones who can repeat predictably. And maybe that's why today, we struggle to make decisions without approval, why we seek permission to follow our passions, why we wait for life to give us a grade. The betrayal wasn't in what they taught us, it was in what they silenced, our questions, our doubts, our voice. This wasn't education, this was programming. And the first step to real learning is realizing you've been fooled. You might think school was designed to educate you, but that's not entirely true. The modern education system wasn't built to create thinkers. It was built to produce workers. In the early 19th and 20th centuries, when factories were booming and industries needed order, discipline, and obedience, a new model of education emerged. It wasn't modeled after a library. It was modeled after a factory. Rows of desks, bells to start and end shifts, subjects divided by the hour, uniforms to standardize identity. One person speaks, the rest listen. This wasn't about enlightenment, it was about efficiency. The goal was simple: train people to follow instructions, to stay in line, to produce, not to question. And so schools became pipelines, not into knowledge, but into compliance.
That's a damn shame when you really think about it, but that's exactly what happens today. It happened when I was a kid. It happened when your parents were a kid. It happened when your grandparents were a kid. But probably prior to that, there was no, formal education system. But damn, that's a shame.
You were taught when to speak, when to be silent, when to move, and when to sit still. Not because it was good for your mind, but because it was convenient for the system. This is the factory model mind, a mind conditioned to value routine over curiosity, performance over passion, and obedience over original thought. And the worst part? It worked. Millions of people left school knowing how to follow a schedule, meet deadlines, and complete tasks. But they had no idea how to ask real questions, how to solve problems that didn't have clear answers, or how to navigate a world where certainty doesn't exist. They became excellent workers, but uncertain humans. They learned how to meet expectations, but forgot how to define their own. This is the real cost of the system. It doesn't just limit your knowledge, it reshapes your identity. It teaches you that your value comes from output, that mistakes are weakness, that stepping outside the line is a risk, not a breakthrough. But here's the truth. No great mind in history ever conformed its way to greatness. They thought differently. They questioned the system. They broke the rules because they saw that the rules were broken. And so must we. Because the world today doesn't need more factory minds. It needs liberated ones. Imagine this: a child who can build entire worlds out of cardboard and string, but fails a math test. Another who can tell stories that bring people to tears, but is told to focus more on science. Or the one who can't sit still in a classroom, but can fix a broken radio in minutes. In most schools, these children aren't seen as gifted. They're seen as difficult, disruptive, underachieving. Why? Because our education system has a very narrow definition of intelligence. If you're not good at math, science, or language arts, in the specific way they teach it, you're labeled as less than. But the truth is this: there is no single form of intelligence. There is creative intelligence, emotional intelligence, mechanical, musical, social, spatial. But most of these never make it onto a report card. Howard Gardner once proposed the theory of multiple intelligences, a radical idea that people are smart in different ways. But the idea never made it past the school gates, because it's hard to standardize diversity. It's hard to test imagination. It's hard to score soul. So the system does something easier. It ignores it. And slowly, students begin to believe that the only intelligence that matters is the kind they don't have. This is how gifts become shame, how uniqueness becomes a flaw, how entire generations grow up believing they're not smart, simply because they were never measured in the right way. This is the death of individual intelligence. Not because it doesn't exist, but because we were never allowed to see it. And here's what's worse. Many of the most successful students, the ones who got the grades, followed the rules, and earned the praise, they grow up afraid to take risks, afraid to think differently, because their worth has always been tied to someone else's approval. So the system doesn't just hurt the rebels, it hurts the conformists too. It builds a world where nobody really wins, where true intelligence is buried beneath standardization, where brilliance is sacrificed for structure. But make no mistake, the mind you were born with is still there. It's just waiting to be unleashed. The moment you stop measuring it by someone else's ruler. You probably remember your grades more than the lessons, the red ink, the silent judgment, the feeling in your chest when your test came back with a number that felt more like a verdict than a score. We were told that those numbers defined our intelligence, but what they really did was shape our identity. From a young age, we were conditioned to believe, if you succeed in school, you're worthy. If you fail, you're less than. And so, we started chasing gold stars instead of curiosity. Approval instead of truth. Perfection instead of growth. But here's the twist. Even the ones who got the A's, many of them are still haunted. Because when your self-worth is built on external validation, you become a prisoner of it. You fear taking risks, because one failure could shatter everything. You play it safe, because the system taught you that mistakes are dangerous. This is the quiet shame that hides behind success. The imposter syndrome of the high achiever. The paralyzing fear that someday someone will find out you're not as smart as they think. And for those who didn't succeed in school, the damage is different, but just as deep. Many walk through life feeling like they missed their shot, like something is wrong with them, like they're permanently behind in a race they never agreed to run.
Like they're always waiting for something. Most people are in that category. Most people were the average achiever, and they are busy waiting for life to quote unquote happen to them, or they're chasing life to make it happen for them, instead of being in their life and realizing that they are currently in their life now. It's wild.
They internalize failure as an identity, and they stop trying, not because they lack potential, but because they've been convinced they don't have any. This is what happens when a system confuses performance with potential. It creates two kinds of prisoners, those who are afraid to fall, and those who were never allowed to rise. Both are trapped in the same psychological cage, built from years of ranking, comparison, and quiet humiliation. But here's the truth. The system never told you. You are not your grades. You are not your performance. And you are not behind. You were just measured by the wrong scale. Because real success isn't about getting everything right. It's about having the courage to keep going when everything feels wrong. And once you understand that, you begin to reclaim the power the system tried to take from you. If everything up to now felt like a betrayal, it's because it was. But betrayal is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of something more powerful. Reclamation. Because once you see the system for what it is, you're no longer trapped by it. The truth is, your mind doesn't need permission to wake up. It only needs the silence to ask, what do I really want to learn? Because learning, real learning, was never meant to be forced. It was meant to be felt, lived, followed with fire. Look around. The most powerful minds today aren't the ones who obeyed the system. They're the ones who broke from it. They taught themselves. They questioned the curriculum. They followed their curiosity like a compass. They built their own education. One mistake, one obsession, one late-night rabbit hole at a time. This is the unlearning revolution. It's about unlearning the lies, that intelligence can be graded, that success has a formula, that your value is earned through obedience, and instead relearning the truth, that your mind is wild, that curiosity is sacred, that no system can define who you are unless you let it. This revolution doesn't require protests. It begins in quiet moments, when you read something because you want to, when you question something that doesn't sit right, when you chase an idea not for a grade, but because it won't let you sleep. That's real education. That's real power. And it's waiting for you, just outside the lines they told you never to cross. If this message stirred something in you, don't let it fade. Share this video with someone who feels stuck in a system that never saw them. And if you're ready to start unlearning, subscribe and stay.
All right, I'm going to wrap it up there. That's a real brief rundown about the betrayal in the modern education system, but it's extremely accurate. Unfortunately, it's the world that we're living in. And what resonates with me about this is I genuinely didn't start learning myself until I was old enough to pick up a book that I wanted to read for myself, like he was saying. It's those nights that you pick up a book and you read because it's something that you want to read. It's the times that you study something because it's what you want to be studying. Those are the times in which the mind will do what it was designed to do for your particular intelligence system. There's emotional intelligence, there's book intelligence, there's, financial intelligence, there's artistic intelligence. There's all types of different intelligences that are at work here, and each individual has their own particular strength in its respective field. So allow yourself to flourish, allow your kids to flourish in their respective fields. Be sure to hit the like and the subscribe button. Leave your thoughts in the comments below about the modern education system and what you particularly think about what you see going on with how the people are still indoctrinated to be good listeners rather than free thinkers and critical thinkers. They're taught to memorize rather than taught to think for themselves. That's all I've got for right now. Until next time,